David Taylor has successfully created a brand new rivalry between Penn State and Oklahoma State.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
If you didn't think there was a rivalry brewing before, there has to be now with Roman Bravo Young leaving the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club to join David Taylor and Oklahoma State. And that's why we're having a Locked On Wrestling crossover. I am Zach Seyko of Locked On Nittany Lions. He is Cody Stovall of Locked On Oklahoma State. And today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate College Football Head Coach. It's a brand new mobile game that is completely free, has no ads, and 100% playable offline. Use the promo code LOCKEDONCFB, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your program before begin your coaching legacy today. David Taylor makes another move. It doesn't sound like the moves are going to stop. That includes trying to push for Cael Dake. Is that going to happen sooner rather than later? And what other potential names from the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club could follow to Oklahoma State? Cody, what exactly are you hearing at this present time? We saw the move with Roman Bravo Young. There's a speculation that eventually Cael Dake will move on. Is it sooner? Is it later? What are you hearing out in Stillwater?
Well, it's not always just when it comes to the Penn State guys, right? There's some other individuals that we have our eyes on, like Yanni, that could potentially come in and help. But
Diakamahalis. Yanni Diakamahalis.
It's a rumor going around that David Taylor is, in fact, building up this staff. And here's the thing. Maybe it's nothing new, right? The Cael Dake situation continues to seemingly grow more legs. But to me, I think the broad stroke thing that I gather here is the RTC program was the secret to success in State College. And David Taylor has brought that with him to Stillwater, Oklahoma.
That's true.
And it's never been an issue of the state of Oklahoma producing quality wrestlers, right? That's always been a thing. But now you're going to have some development on top of the talent-rich area. Man, it's not going to be too much longer before Oklahoma State, Penn State is the new thing in college wrestling.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think you're going to have, and it's not going to be that when you get to the postseason, right? It's not going to be that 100-point gap. It's like, oh, Penn State's number 1 and Oklahoma State's number 2. No one has really been that number 2 team for quite some time. I guess there was Iowa just a few years back as far as, having, more points, but Penn State had the more individual champions. But look how much distance Penn State has created since that moment in time. And It feels like they stand all alone away from Iowa, Michigan, Oklahoma State, Cornell, right? So you mentioned Cornell, and we're talking about guys like Yanni Diakamahalis, Cael Dake, right? And I wonder because of that Cornell connection, if Diakamahalis is truly going to go to Oklahoma State and join the RTC program, that almost adds a little more inspiration to Cael Dake to make a move sooner rather than later. I wonder.
Well, obviously there's several layers to it, but we all know one thing, that David Taylor, he's definitely not playing around. He's not playing favorites, and he's already decided to choose violence with Nittany Lion country. And you know what? I'm here for it.
David Taylor is I've said this already. He's capitalizing on his connections, Cody. He's using the artillery setup that Oklahoma State has given him everything from facilities to commitment to obviously the financial contract. I'm not even referring to the contract. It's just this wholehearted support that
the buy-in to bring in the staff and the RTC and everybody, and
NIL, all of it.
From a financial perspective, John Smith could have coached for 20 more years, and I guarantee you we would have never came close to paying him the amount that we're paying David Taylor and some of the assistant coaches like Thomas Gilman and Jimmy Kennedy. I think keeping Tyler Caldwell was absolutely massive from the previous John Smith staff. And, we just continue to bring more people in to spice up what is now an officially brewing rivalry, brother.
Well, let's figure out the Cael Dake situation here, because I've already stated my opinion that I think this happens in the offseason of 2025. And I think that because Cael Dake has been on the East Coast, right? Cornell, state of New York. That's where he's from. And then he moved his family down into State College, Pennsylvania to be with David Taylor, but now he's built a life for himself. For those who don't remember, it took multiple offers from Oklahoma State. They had to push him. They had to say, okay, hey, we're not going away until we put our best offer truly on the table to a point where you cannot refuse. But that's what happened. David Taylor said no, 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 and Oklahoma State was very persistent. And eventually it happened because David Taylor, been in State College, Pennsylvania for a long time, has the gymnasium, has a family. Everything that he's known has been Penn State related and Nittany Line Wrestling Club related. So that's a lot to give up. It's a similar situation to Cael Dake. He has a family. He just finished he just won his second bronze medal out at the Olympics. I imagine that there's just going to be a time element to it. It's not like he can just drop everything and say that, oh, I'll move to Oklahoma State and start my life over. No, he has to also consider his wife, his kids, and everything that he's materialized in State College to this point.
Right, but you do know that building a family in a community like Stillwater, Oklahoma is part of the sales pitch for Cael Dake on behalf of David Taylor, because the things that David Taylor was able to do in Pennsylvania, this was his cup of tea anyways, right? The farming, the kind of secluded lifestyle. Now he has that in Stillwater. So if you're talking about building a family and growing roots in a new area, honestly, there's not much of a better place in the country than Stillwater, Oklahoma. Yeah. Especially when we're talking about wrestling, right? So it's kind of a hotbed of activity, just like Pennsylvania is, just like Iowa is, and even Ohio, right? Oklahoma is one of those communities. So if there was anything about Pennsylvania that was very appealing for Cael Dake, I think he's going to be able to find it in Stillwater too, and I'm sure that's a pitch for David Taylor.
And David Taylor's his best friend, his business partner. That was the first phone call that David Taylor made, was to Cael Dake to just say, hey, what are your thoughts on this? I just got offered the Oklahoma State head coaching job. Should I take it? Should I not? Right. They had, that was one of the preliminary conversations. David Taylor didn't call anybody else. He called Cael Dake. And that's my point. And Cody, are we in agreement here that this is all but guaranteed? Because I still see some people that say that, well, Cael Dake joined the Nittany Line Wrestling Club. Yes, I think the biggest reason was because of his relationship with David Taylor, but also the opportunity to work with Cael Sanderson. Penn State has been at the top for the past decade, just in general. Nittany Line Wrestling Club, Penn State Wrestling, the collegiate program, and just being active on the American stage and the world stage. So I can almost all but guarantee that Cael Dake will eventually end up at Oklahoma State. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Do you agree?
I do agree, right? Because especially in today's landscape of NIL and transfer market, and the high school recruiting is kind of shifted somewhat significantly just from an evaluation standpoint. So now it's more about the coaches. You're not going to a university as much anymore as you're going to your coaches. So relationships are going to matter more now than ever before at any point in time in recruiting. So because you have some of those close ties with those two gentlemen, it's going to make the seamless transition in recruiting pretty instantaneous, in my opinion, which is why it's only a matter of time, unfortunately, for State fans.
The obstacle that I see in all of this, and this is more of a perspective on Cael Dake's situation. Cael Dake wants to be a head coach as well. I imagine that he wants to lead a wrestling program similar to the caliber of a Penn State, of an Oklahoma State. But unlike a college football or a college basketball, a lot of wrestling programs don't have this pedigree. You have Penn State, Oklahoma State, Michigan, Iowa, Ohio State, right? I know there's, but there's about a dozen, maybe a dozen and a half of these programs that have this kind of status, whereas everything else would be a rebuild. And those coaches don't vacate these spots very often.
Right. I think you're being very, very generous when you say a dozen, because, the teams that typically come to mind are the ones you just mentioned, right? I think historically you can throw Iowa State in there, Mizzou in there, Minnesota in there. But after that, right, you do have to talk about Cornell. But then the gap, just seems to get pretty significant. I think if you look in the Big 12, that's a very good example. There were some really good, wrestlers in the Big 12, like Wyatt Hendrickson at Air Force, but you weren't going to see it, right, because of the conference affiliation that he was formerly in. I think the Big 12 in and of itself and having Mizzou in it is obviously beneficial. Iowa State now getting Christian Carroll. They've got something brewing, but yeah, if Kyle Dake's going to be a head coach, he's a big enough name and a good enough talent evaluator and developmental guy that he's not going to have to take an Air Force style job. He will inevitably end up at a Minnesota or an Iowa or Ohio State or a Michigan, I think, at some point in time. But when you're talking about resumes, there's not much better on the resume, not named Iowa, than Penn State, Oklahoma State, right? So if you have Penn State and Oklahoma State on your resume, the only thing missing is Iowa, right? Then you have the trifecta of being able to get a job whenever you want, however you want, anytime you want.
And that's my point. So you name a school like a Minnesota, I don't know that Kyle Dake takes a job like Minnesota. It has to be right. And historically I know how good they were, but right now in the present, it's Iowa, Michigan, Penn State, Oklahoma State, Cornell. But again, when are any of these jobs going to open up? Oklahoma State was almost, it's all about timing. It's all about timing because look at what David Taylor wouldn't be the head coach there if John Smith doesn't step down and if David Taylor doesn't lose to Aaron Brooks.
Yeah, 100% accurate. But I mean, I think the Aaron Brooks, right? That's a completely another layer that is going to be massively beneficial for Penn State. I know maybe some of the lower weights coaching and RTC may be a little bit of a difficulty, but as far as the upper weights go, he's somebody that's going to continue that Penn State lineage of phenomenal dudes here recently. So I think there's still a lot at Penn State that is going to be extremely difficult to overcome, right? I don't think anybody's touching you guys for a national title this year, including us, no matter who we continue to add. Didn't you guys break point scoring records and return most of that roster? Right. So 2024 might be a given, but I think, again, this is another example of David Taylor planting that flag of saying Oklahoma State is right around the corner, and 2025 might be a completely different story. It might be a legitimate race, and I'm here for it, man. I can't wait.
I think that's a perfect segue into potential other names that could follow Roman Bravo Young with David to go join David Taylor out in Stillwater and how that Roman Bravo Young move actually impacts both Oklahoma State and Penn State. That's coming up next here on this Locked On Crossover. And today's crossover episode is brought to you by Ibotta. For those who don't know, Ibotta is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. You can earn on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys. So you can make sure that you're always beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. Get this, the average Ibotta user earns $256 per year. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, that flight you've always been eyeing, or the fancy dinner that you've been craving. Now, other apps, they'll give you points, but that doesn't really amount to much. With Ibotta, you earn cash back that you can withdraw to your bank account, PayPal, or gift cards. Simply add offers into the app, upload your receipt, and voila, the money is yours. You can save on over 2,400 brands and shop at over 1,000 retailers, including your favorite grocery stores, Lowe's, Macy's, Sephora, Best Buy, just to name some of the few. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using this code, LOCKEDONCollege. That's when you register. Just go to the App Store, Google Play Store, download the free Ibotta app, and start earning cash back and use code LOCKEDONCollege. That's IBOTTA in the Google Play or App Store and use code LOCKEDONCollege. Now, before we get back to the podcast, ladies and gentlemen, college football is back, and it's not too late to catch up before the season kicks off. Whether it's the SEC, ACC, Big 10, Big 12, you can get it all from Locked On stable of college experts by subscribing to the Locked On College Football podcast. Who has the chance to make the playoffs? What team will cause chaos in their new conferences? Everything you need to know, and it's all in one place. Be sure to follow and subscribe to the Locked On College Football podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Roman Bravo Young announces his move to join David Taylor out in Oklahoma State. And I've said this already, but I'll say it again, Cody. I imagine you know this as well. Nobody was surprised here over on the Penn State Nittany Line Wrestling Club side of things that this was a move that was anticipated. Roman Bravo Young worked pretty closely with Jimmy Kennedy, Thomas Gilman, and we just got done talking about how important relationships were. So yes, environment is an element. Obviously, it's always going to be, but it's those relationships that make that environment so much better. For what it's worth, I mean, Roman Bravo Young is from that side of the country. I know that's the Midwest, but he's from Arizona. He's from Tucson, Arizona. I imagine a homesickness element to this. Now, I know Roman Bravo Young's been always in Pennsylvania for quite some time now, but I imagine this it gets you closer to family and friends from home, and you get to work with some of your best friends still in Thomas Gilman and Jimmy Kennedy.
He's back home in Big 12 country, baby. And so I know Penn State fans obviously were slightly anticipatory of this move, but I can tell you from an Oklahoma State perspective, yes, we heard the grumblings. Yes, it would have been a great idea, but there was several conversations in some of the groups I'm in. This was actually going to happen because I think it was a 50-50 conversation between if he does this, that kind of, to me, solidifies the Penn State, Oklahoma State animosity. If he didn't bring in Roman Bravo Young, that could be a conversation of maybe there's something brewing. But I feel like this is the final, not a middle finger by David Taylor by any stretch of the imagination, but maybe I'm being slightly hyperbolic, but you get my point. This was definitely, again, David Taylor making a statement, and the statement is, I'm going to build something here at Oklahoma State. I understand that Penn State is going to be in my way. I might as well embrace the hate right now. And I feel like this is that kind of move that solidifies that.
And David Taylor, now we've talked about Yianni Diakomahalis being a name to watch for in terms of just Oklahoma State in general. If you're looking for any other Penn State, Nittany Lion Wrestling Club names, the only one that I've heard so far just to keep an eye on is Morgan McIntosh. It's a possibility, but don't think that there's just going to be this all-out blitz. I think the blitz was Jimmy Kennedy, Thomas Gilman.
Right.
And now, okay, Roman Bravo Young comes in, and then Morgan McIntosh potentially could be that next name. And then obviously there's Kyle Dake. He's still with the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club, and he's best friends with David Taylor. But that's more about the relationship between David Taylor and Kyle Dake. And it's just kind of the symptom of the recruitment here is that, well, Kyle Dake was at the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club, and now he's most likely going to follow David Taylor out to Oklahoma State here. So that's not that your point of creating a rivalry and creating some animosity here. Getting Kyle Dake is more about Kyle Dake than it is making a statement to Penn State, Cael Sanderson, and NLWC. That's my point.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's again, maybe middle finger was the wrong terminology. Because
I get what you're saying. Consequentially, that's true, though.
Right.
It's not, I don't think it's an intentional, like, hey, we got you. But in light of things, it is a chess move. It is a chess move.
100%. And there's no mistake here, right? All of these guys that have decided to make this move, it's for some sort of future investment, whether it be they want to be head coaches like Thomas Gilman. He's not going to stay as an assistant at Oklahoma State forever. And if Kyle Dake joins the fold, that'll be the same story there. But all of these guys are doing this to elevate their careers. Again, they already have I want to say not in our lifetime, but in recent memory, Penn State has been the pinnacle of wrestling. They took the mantle from Oklahoma State, and they've continued to run with it. Mm-hmm. So now that's the standard, again, when you're talking about resumes, all of these guys have that standard on their resume. Now, if you can get Oklahoma State on there, not only that, but if you can take an Oklahoma State that is used to traditionally competing for national titles year in and year out, that then went to 4th place and then 5th place and then 7th place and then 8th place. Yeah. That's the trajectory of Oklahoma State wrestling. So if you can take a team that's 8th place, right, 7th place, 8th place, 2 years in a row now, and you can instantaneously get them to top 3 in year 1, that's a huge resume builder for Thomas Gilman, Kyle Dake, Coach Kennedy, and whomever else, right? So, yeah, they're doing this because it's going to advance their career. If this is the staff that gets Oklahoma State over the Penn State hump, then they're all going to be able to pretty much pick a job not named Oklahoma State or Penn State.
And Oklahoma State, by all means, is hurting Penn State in this case, and the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club. These two, I want to obviously separate them, of course, because there's the Penn State. Same thing with Oklahoma State's RTC program, but that's David Taylor's doing the right thing because he's mimicking what Cael Sanderson did by building out the wrestling club, building out the RTC program, and then that allows the collegiate program itself to continue to build up because people are going to want to wrestle alongside. I mean, look at it. Roman Bravo Young wants to wrestle and train alongside Jimmy Kennedy and Thomas Gilman, who helped him become a better wrestler. And that's obvious.
Dayton Fix is going to square somewhere in that mix as well for him.
Absolutely. From Oklahoma State's perspective. And so furthermore in that, Oklahoma State depleted Penn State's resources at the lightweight. Think about it for a second, Cody. You had Jimmy Kennedy, who, made Roman Bravo Young into an even, helped coach him at the tail end of his career. You had him training with Thomas Gilman, who, Olympic medalist, Olympic qualifier, right? Always competitive on the international stage. And now you lose Jimmy Kennedy, who helped kind of reinvent that lightweight position, that 125 weight class, because Penn State has always struggled at that true lightweight. That was just an afterthought. And then Braden Davis, comes into the fold as a true freshman, and look at the noise that he's making. My point being is that Penn State, with a weight class that they've already kind of struggled with, and then you deplete all of those most of the resources, right? Not all of them. Penn State, the cupboard's not bare. But you take Thomas Gilman, you take Roman Bravo Young, you take Jimmy Kennedy, all of the architects for this lower half of the weight classes, and you take 3 of them.
Well, and that's honestly something that we needed, right? Because whenever you look at some of the lower weight classes, the years of having Nick Piccinini are no longer there. We got Troy Spradley coming back. Right, he went 8-2 at Minnesota. He redshirted, comes to Oklahoma State, goes 23-8. He was the number 6 seed in nationals, where he ended up being very underwhelming. And so he needs to take that next step forward. And this coaching staff is surely going to be able to get him there. And then you have Sam Smith at 125 as well. He's got the John Smith blood, so he's probably not going to be a number 2 for long. And I think this is kind of a move to accentuate that. Plus, we need a decent amount of help at 133. We're very, very young at 133. We've got 2 top 10, recruiting class guys there, but they have no experience. And the development side of the thing is what we're seeing a big difference in, right? Yeah. I think that, again, the secret to success at Penn State has now been kind of visible, right, from what David Taylor's doing in the RTC. In the state of Oklahoma, the RTC program and things previously has always been good, but it's never been like this. Realistically speaking, right, shout out to Cael Sanderson, David Taylor and this staff are teaching young kids like very, very new, intricate, small details that make a massive difference in utilizing leverage. So instead of just being a good wrestler, like a lot of Okies are, now they're fine-tuning it. That's what David Taylor and the staff has brought in. That has been like very eye-opening for us because we all were so comfortable with John Smith, right? And if John Smith's in charge, we're going to be fine. But now seeing what David Taylor does, how you move your elbow just a couple inches here and you scoot your hips like 2.5 inches this way instead of this way, that stuff is absolutely phenomenal to watch. And now we see why Penn State has been so dominant, because the guys they have coming up are already privy to the benefits of the Penn State system offered by Cael Sanderson. So, dude, the development, especially at the younger weights, is going to be something that I think catapults us very quickly.
Let's take this a step further. The recruiting aspect of it, the future, because we've talked a lot about the present, but the future is also very important, as you have alluded to, that Oklahoma State could be right there in the thick of it as soon as 2025. We'll talk about more of that and how Penn State would potentially recover from the losses of Kennedy, Gilman, Roman Bravo Young on the other side of this break. And today's crossover episode is also brought to you by Ultimate College Football HC, a Locked On Nittany Lion and Oklahoma State fans. I'm excited to share a game that I know you'll love, and it's Ultimate College Football HC. You can step into the role of a head coach and lead your team to glory. Imagine coaching the Nittany Lions or Oklahoma State, from recruiting players to managing training camps and scholarships. Every crucial decision is in your hands, but can you handle the pressure? What I love most about this game is the ability to call offensive plays during the games, shaping your season and your program's future. Ultimate College Football HC is free, it's ad-free, and playable offline. Perfect for gaming on the go. Now, Ultimate College Football HC has a special offer for Locked On Nittany Lion and Oklahoma State fans. You can use promo code LOCKEDONCFB in the game store for a free boost that will help your program. And all you got to do in order to download the game is go to ultimate-cfb.com, or you can find it in the App Store. Again, that is Ultimate College Football HC. Begin your coaching legacy today. Again, Jimmy Kennedy, Thomas Gilman, Roman Bravo Young, now all at Oklahoma State, integral parts of the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club and Penn State's coaching staff as a whole. Not only people to train with, but people that will work with you and coach you. And lightweights are very important. They're a dime of a dozen. And I'm not saying anybody can be a heavyweight, but you have an easier time because there's just more wrestlers, athletes available to wrestle in those upper weight classes. It's very difficult to find the Thomas Gilmans, the Spencer Lees of the world, Roman Bravo Youngs, just to name the people that, Spencer Lee obviously went off to the Olympics here. So it's more difficult. It's just the fact of the matter. It is more difficult to find elite lightweight wrestlers than it is to find elite heavyweight wrestlers.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think whenever you look at this previous year, it's another indication of that, because you are going to have, a decent amount of guys that can learn from just somebody like a Dayton Fix. But as you get into bigger weights, that's typically where you have some issues. But that's why I'm kind of excited about this recruiting class that Oklahoma State, is been able to bring in. Wyatt Hendrickson, of course, is going to be the talk of the town, as he should be. But, dude, we've got some young cats like Jersey Rob. Jersey Rob was a very, very highly rated guy that had offers from all over the country. Could be a 197-pounder, but at the end of the day, he could potentially bump up to 194. We return Connor Doucette. Yeah, he hasn't necessarily been the biggest surprise on campus, but he's done enough to kind of be serviceable. Oklahoma State has a top 10 recruiting class pretty much every single year. The question is, are we going to be able to capitalize with it? And are guys like Cody Merrill going to be able to see the mat very, very early on? I think it's going to be difficult for that to happen, but he's such a highly rated guy. It is a possibility. Same with J.J. McComas, another top 10 national recruit that ended up in Stillwater from Stillwater High School. Is he going to be able to carve out a role for himself at that 133 weight class? There's a lot that goes into it, man. And the recruiting classes at Oklahoma State, they're always going to be top 10. Right? Let's just call a spade a spade. It is what it is. And we continue to get some of the upper weight guys as well. Now, losing Christian Carroll's not fun, right? He's going to Iowa State because evidently he was not a big fan of bumping down to 197. So he took his talents elsewhere. So that 197 might be a little bit of a gap, but the lightweights and the developmental side of those lightweights should carry us. And you already know, David Taylor loves 165-pounders. So we got Caleb Fish, we got Cam Amin, we got Dean Hamidi, we got Dean Hamidi's brother. So that 165-pound weight class is the other part of this that we're not taking into consideration. You've got the guys to train the lighter weights. David Taylor clearly is in love with 165-pounders. I mean, heck, we just mentioned Cody Merrill. Cody Merrill's going to end up at a 165, 174-ish pound range as well. I just I see the benefits of getting Wyatt Hendrickson as another extension to help that heavyweight room.
Cody, I want to know your thoughts on this one, because I've seen suggested for Penn State to recover those losses of Kennedy, Gilman, Bravo Young, just to get the lightweight part of the roster in the Nittany Lion Wrestling Club back to its original stature. To go and get a Spencer Lee, it would make sense. He's from the state of Pennsylvania. I don't see it happening. I don't know. I think he's an Iowa wrestler, an Iowa Hawkeye through and through. However, I mean, Thomas Gilman made that exact same move. I just see it a little differently here. The impression that I have is that Spencer Lee, I don't think he would. I don't know that there's anybody that's on staff, that's on the roster, because that's, again, David Taylor helped bridge that connection, bridge that gap. I just don't see the second version of Thomas Gilman where Spencer Lee ends up in Happy Valley to continue his collegiate career, or I shouldn't say collegiate, his wrestling career with Cael Sanderson in Happy Valley with the Nittany Line Wrestling Club. But maybe you think differently. I can't see it happening.
I don't necessarily either, but, we just talked about resume building, and if you're going to go from a Penn State to an Oklahoma State, that's very beneficial to your resume. I think the same could be said with Spencer Lee. It doesn't make a lot of sense, right, because it does feel like that their coach, much like John Smith, is starting to get to the end of his win. Maybe he's a natural guy to take over, but again, if you're looking for resume building, it would make some sense, and it would be huge for Penn State if they were able to get Spencer Lee there.
Well, it would be huge for Penn State. Yeah, it's just a matter of how much would it benefit Spencer Lee. And it sounds like Spencer Lee is going to, based on his social media post, saying, hey, no one's going to remember me alluding to the fact that no one's going to remember a silver medalist. And, I agree with the sentiment. I wouldn't downplay an Olympic medal, but that's why I'm talking about Spencer Lee, and Spencer Lee's actually in Paris at the Olympics because he holds himself to such a high standard. But it sounds like he is going to make a move of some sort. I just think it's going to be internally at Iowa. Maybe that's the coaching route, right? And rather than just being a competitive wrestler. But it sounds like he's going to make some sort of move that ultimately a lot of people in the wrestling community will, in fact, talk about when he does make it.
Oh, yeah. He's one of those names that, when he does something, it's going to be a hot topic of conversation for sure.
Let's finish with this, because Penn State and Oklahoma State are going to go head to head for a lot of these top 10 recruits in the nation, or I should say, we'll branch it out to the guys that are in the top 30, right? And the gap is so close for most of them that it's like, what's the difference between the 25th kid versus the 30th kid, right?
Right.
In Penn State's case, the priority is going to, and for everybody else too, Iowa, Michigan, etc., and Oklahoma State, Bo Bassett, Jax Forrest. I want anybody that's watching from Penn State side of things to know that because Bo Bassett and Jax Forrest are in the state of Pennsylvania and they go to a Pennsylvania high school doesn't guarantee that they're going to end up as collegiate wrestlers for the Nittany Lions. Oklahoma State is going to be just as much in the thick of that.
100%. Yeah, Bo Bassett is he's a generational talent that can kind of flip a wrestling room on its head. So if you can get him, it doesn't matter who gets him, but whoever does get him, I think that's somebody that you can kind of use as a focal point to build your roster around, kind of like we had previously been using Dayton Fix to build the roster around. Now we're using Dustin Plott at 184 to build our roster around. You got to have some of those guys. And I do think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to Oklahoma State, Penn State, Iowa style conversation for Bo Bassett.
Oh yeah, Bo. I am eager to see how this recruitment for Bo Bassett shakes out. And look, I know he's in high school, right? But you just have to continue to see what he's accomplished over his young career in general, just as a person, right? Just as an individual human being, aside from the fact that he is a wrestler. He's one of the most disciplined. I mean, he's so disciplined at 16, 17 years old compared to guys. I mean, again, he's defeating wrestlers that are in college, that are in the senior circuit. Bo Bassett certainly has the potential to wrestle an undefeated career at the collegiate level.
Well, I think he knows that he's got the talent to do so. But another thing that I think is interesting with him is the way he's been able to utilize his own recruiting. I've never seen a wrestler put out a top 30, right? And then he
constantly update it. Yeah.
He has like statistical metrics that cut teams out, and then he cuts it, by certain levels, and he does it incrementally on purpose throughout the course of the season. So the dude thought about his recruiting game plan way before he ever even started getting recruited, and now you're seeing that, which is yet again another reason why he's a generational talent that anybody would be lucky to build their rosters around.
This has been a wrestling Locked On crossover. And Cody, I enjoy these conversations a lot because this, again, even though Penn State and Oklahoma State aren't in the same conference, that's a shame. However, it's going to create for exciting postseasons. And just, I don't want to say that I was bored, but it's like, oh, Penn State's 100 points away from everybody else. It's like, when is somebody going to catch up? So David Taylor and Oklahoma State putting this pressure on Penn State to continue to live up to that standard is good for these kinds of conversations, debates, and it just makes the sport of wrestling that much more exciting.
Well, bro, maybe you ain't going to say it, but I'll say it. It was boring watching Penn State just beat the tar out of everybody.
Well, it's great when it happens on my side of things, right?
Nah, the boring days are about to be over. But again, Penn State, I don't think any of us are going to be able to touch you guys this season. But 2025, 2026, 2027, those years are going to be a lot of fun. And I really do feel like the animosity and the way that the marketing and everything is going nowadays in the NIL transfer market era, the conversation will be Oklahoma State, Penn State in wrestling. And I think traditionally, Iowa, Oklahoma State, right? That's kind of viewed as one of the biggest matches of the year.
Right.
We need to find a way to make Oklahoma State, Penn State a yearly event, because I guarantee you it would put up bigger numbers and sell out bigger football stadiums than O State or Iowa.
I think that's an excellent point, and maybe something that will happen sooner rather than later. The teacher versus the student at a Beaver Stadium. Cael Sanderson versus David Taylor. I can see it happening. I don't think that's a matter of if. I think that's a matter of when. If that's this season in 24 or maybe 25 or 26, it's going to happen.
Give me a wide out in Happy Valley for a wrestling match, brother. I'm all for it. That would be the duel. That would be the duel of a lifetime.
This has been a Locked On crossover, talking some collegiate wrestling. He is Cody Stovall of Locked On Oklahoma State. I'm Zach Seyko of Locked On Nittany Lions. Thanks so much for joining us, and let us know your thoughts down in the comments section about this rivalry that has been created between Penn State and Oklahoma State wrestling. And as always, thank you for making Locked On Nittany Lions and Locked On Oklahoma State your first listen and watch every single day. For your second listen, you got to check out the Locked On College Football podcast, hosted by Spencer McLaughlin. I've been a guest on that show many times, and I know you will enjoy it as much as I do. He's talking everything from NIL deals, the impact of the transfer portal on rosters, and then with this new season coming up, conference realignment, the expanded college football playoff. Spencer talks about all of it and more over at the Locked On College Football podcast, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.